everyone, welcome. We're glad you're here. In this video, we'll share some highlights from the week we spent overlanding Kansas and talk about some of the pros and cons of overlanding in Kansas. Kansas isn't a state many people associate with overlanding, depending on how you define that term, but there are some definite pros to exploring Kansas. If you are considering a trip to Kansas, though, it's important to be aware of the cons as well. If you want to know more about any of the places we're showing in this video, we do have a Kansas playlist with more in-depth videos. We'll be sure to link that at the end. This was our first time exploring Kansas, so we're definitely not experts. So we invite you to share any other pros or cons you can think of in the comments. We took this trip in mid-March of 2024, and here are our totals for the trip. As we get into the pros and cons, we'll be coming back to a few of these. Before we get into those, here's a quick recap of the trip. This was our first time exploring Kansas, and it was a busy week. We wanted to see as much of Kansas as possible. And that leads us to con number 1. It is a long ways between different areas of Kansas. We drove over 300 miles every day, and a couple days it was almost 400. We were okay with that because we wanted to see as much as possible, but it does make for some long days, especially when you're stopping to see attractions along the way. And that actually leads to our first pro. None of the attractions we went to were crowded at all. We were the only people at many of the natural areas we went to, and even more popular attractions like Big Brutus weren't very crowded. There are fewer people in Kansas than we're used to and fewer people visiting it, so you really don't have to worry about being overcrowded. When we come back to Kansas in the future, we will pick one area to explore more in depth. There were many areas like the national grasslands that we would like to spend more time exploring. That leads into our second con. With the exception of the national grasslands in the southwest corner of Kansas, there are no national forests or national lands. This means there's no free dispersed camping like many people who are familiar with national forests and BLM land are used to. There is free camping in Kansas, though. Kansas has a whole network of state fishing lakes scattered around the state that offers some really nice free camping. While this certainly isn't the same as dispersed camping, we have to say we were pleasantly surprised. This time of year and during the week, for the most part, they weren't very crowded, although I'm sure that may change during the summer. But we've seen some pretty crowded dispersed camping areas as well. Another thing that some people might consider a con is that many of the historical sites and natural features are on private land. So that means they're only open to the public because the landowner allows access. We were really surprised at how much access they do allow and that access is free. Now, there may be more to this story than we know, of course, but it seems like a lot of the landowners in Kansas are working to preserve the history, preserve the natural features, and to share it with visitors. So we would consider that a pro. Another pro would be just how beautiful Kansas is. We had kind of a stereotypical, I guess, image of Kansas in our minds. The flat farmland, flat, dry plains. But we found that while there are some areas like that, Kansas has a lot of varied terrain. And the sky is just gorgeous. Every morning and every evening, it puts on a show. For the 5 days we were there was not a sunrise or sunset that wasn't spectacular. Since we were here in mid-March, everything was still pretty brown, although it still was beautiful. But if we were to come again, I think we would come mid-April. We think that might be the time when everything really starts to come alive. A potential con, though, could be the weather. As you start to get into late April and May, of course, that's tornado season. So you have to be aware of the weather. Kansas can have some really dramatic weather. Again, we were here in mid-March and had beautiful weather. Daytime temps were in the 60s, but when there are no clouds in the sky, that sun is intense. Definitely felt hotter than back in Indiana. We also had no idea that Kansas was so windy. Pretty much every place we went in Kansas, the entire week was windy. It would calm down every now and then, but every day there was wind. The last thing we would mention would be the roads, terrain. There are plenty of paved roads to get you across the state and to more populated areas. But if you're wanting to visit some of the natural areas and historic sites, you're gonna be driving on gravel and dirt. Some people may consider that a con. We consider it a pro. We love a gravel or dirt road, and that may be one of the reasons that some of these areas are so much less crowded. For the most part, Kansas seems to do a really great job of maintaining these roads, which could be considered a pro, but it's going to take you longer to get someplace on a gravel or dirt road, so that is something that could be a con. Overall, we feel like the pros outweighed the cons, and we had a great time exploring Kansas. This is our last video about Kansas for now. It's time for us to head back home again to Indiana. But there are some places in Kansas that we definitely would like to get back to again in the future. And we intentionally skipped the cities on this trip, so we'd like to come back and explore those as well. We hope you've enjoyed learning about Kansas along with us. And we hope you'll join us for future videos wherever our travels take us. Thanks for watching.